Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmons. Confused messaging today on the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's military is now saying it will close the vital waterway again after the authorities in Iran said on Friday it would be completely reopened to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire. Well, Iran's parliament speaker had said it would shut again if the US blockade on Iran ports continued. US President Donald Trump had imposed the blockade earlier this week, and despite Iran saying it would reopen the strait, Mr. Trump said the blockade would continue until a peace deal is reached. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a crucial route for global shipping, and there had been reports that around 20 ships, including oil tankers and container vessels, had started to sail. Reports now say they've been ordered to turn around. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Nick Beek in Jerusalem, who's following all the developments for us. Nick, try if you can to make sense of all of this for us.
Yeah, hi again, Samantha. I think what we've got to go on at the moment is this report that's coming from Iranian state media saying that the Strait of Hormuz will be closed once again, if not completely closed, returning to what they're describing as strict management. So this is what we saw before this arrangement was reached yesterday, whereby the majority of vessels were not able to pass unless maybe they were paying some sort of toll or they were getting the explicit permission of the Iranians to do so. Why is Iran saying this now? As you say, there was confusion this morning. They were suggesting that the strait was open. What the Iranians are saying is that the Americans have failed to fulfill their obligations. They haven't been more explicit about this. But certainly, if we look at what happened yesterday, there was this great fanfare as the strait was announced as being reopening. President Trump saying it would be a complete reopening. But at the same time, the Americans said that they would keep up this blockade of ships, any sort of vessel heading to an Iranian port. So what it seems now is the Iranians say that the Americans have not kept their side of the deal. And so as a consequence, the strait, to all intents and purposes, will be closed once again.
Nick, in the past short while, Pakistan's Prime Minister has said that he's completed a three-country diplomatic tour aimed at Iran peace statement. That's coming in on the AFP news agency. Of course, Pakistan hosted those talks last weekend between the US and Iran. So 1 week on, and with this ceasefire running out in days, where are we at diplomatically?
Hard to tell, Samantha. Certainly President Trump is suggesting that we're on the brink of some sort of deal. He said repeatedly that the Iranians have basically agreed to a lot of what the Americans want, whether that's their enriched uranium supplies, the idea of the Iranians giving them up and potentially not doing anything more in terms of a nuclear program for a number of years to come. The Iranians have denied this publicly. So I mean, it's really hard to see if any sort of behind-the-scenes agreement has been reached or if there's been progress towards one which would justify both teams coming back to Pakistan, for example, and having a second round of talks. We know there was a marathon negotiation last weekend. It didn't amount to anything. So certainly it's not good news if the Strait of Hormuz is being shut, because this is something which has been so crucial to this whole conflict and has sent out reverberations around the world with so much oil normally passing through. So it could be the case that there is a lot of bravado, there's a lot of social media noise, and we hear that talks will take place. But at the moment, I think no one has any real confidence that things are going in the right direction. One thing I should say is that this ceasefire in Lebanon between the Israelis and Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed group in Lebanon, is holding for now. And I think that is certainly sort of easing some of the pressure here. But let's see what is done with that window of opportunity.
Yeah, and we'll get more on the situation in Lebanon coming up very shortly. But to what extent there in Israel do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu believes he's achieved his goals?
Well, I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been changing his position in some respects. He said right at the outset of the Iran war, when the Americans joined the Israelis in those strikes on Tehran and other parts of Iran, he said really there were three key aims there. They wanted to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, its ambitions for a nuclear program, and of course any sort of route towards getting a nuclear weapon. He said he wanted to remove the ballistic threat that Iran faced. And no, those are two key war aims that his opponents here say they simply haven't been realised. And the suggestion was that he wanted the war to continue. So what we had just a couple of days ago was that a ceasefire being announced by President Trump. And a lot of people here in Israel saying that what's happening here is that President Trump had decided belatedly that there needed to be a ceasefire so that his wider talks with Iran could continue and potentially prosper. So in terms of the public mood in Israel, a lot of people quite surprised by this ceasefire, seeing that President Trump is in the driving seat. That's the analysis. And also in the north of the country, a lot of people are really unhappy, talking about a betrayal because they don't think a ceasefire will bring anything for them. They worry that Hezbollah won't be disarmed, won't be disbanded, and that they'll face the threat of rockets being fired by Hezbollah by many days, months, potentially years to come.
OK, Nick Beek in Jerusalem for now. Thank you. Well, the Strait of Hormuz isn't, of course, the only issue stopping the US and Iran from reaching a deal. The two countries also appear to disagree over the future of Iran's enriched uranium, which Mr. Trump has said will be dug up and taken to the US. While the current ceasefire between the US and Iran still appears to be holding, it is due to run out next week, with both sides still far apart on agreeing the conditions for a lasting peace. Lise Doucette, our chief international correspondent, is in Tehran and reporting on condition that none of her material is used on the BBC's Persian service. These restrictions apply to all international media organisations operating inside the country. She told us there are signs the two sides are moving towards a memorandum of understanding, which would open the way for more detailed negotiations.
Iran's announcement yesterday that the Strait of Hormuz was now completely open was greeted with cautious optimism. But then it became clear that vessels still had to take routes designated and controlled by Tehran, and that it wouldn't remain open unless the US lifted its own blockade. And there's also been a blizzard of contradictory statements when it comes to progress in the peace talks. The real issue is that President Trump seems to believe that a deal between Tehran and Washington, what would be a major diplomatic achievement, can be done in a matter of days. But what he describes as insignificant differences amount to what would be major concessions by Iran. And Iran's new leaders, more hardline, aren't indicating they're ready to make them. The one glimmer of hope is that there does seem to be progress behind the scenes on a memorandum of understanding. Both sides would agree to embark on a period of more detailed discussions lasting about 60 days. Even that may not be enough to reach what would be a complex, comprehensive and controversial deal. But it may be enough just to hold this fragile ceasefire in place.
Well, President Trump says he's blocking Israel from bombing Lebanon and that enough is enough as the tentative truce between the two countries enters its second day. Israel says it reserves the right to continue targeting the armed group Hezbollah and that it won't pull its troops out of Lebanon. Just as the ceasefire came into force, the Israeli military said it had hit more than 380 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon over a 24-hour period. One person was also killed by an Israeli drone. Well, these are live pictures from southern Lebanon, where thousands of people have started to return to their homes after 6 weeks of bombing south of the Litani River. Israel's attacks across Lebanon have killed more than 2,000 people since the beginning of the conflict 6 weeks ago. More than 1 million people have been displaced. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun said in a televised address on Friday that Lebanon is on the verge of a permanent agreement with Israel, but that the country won't give up its sovereignty. Let's get more on this with The Guardian's Beirut reporter William Christou. William, welcome to you. Is there any more detail about this proposed deal that Lebanon may be reaching with Israel?
No, I think we're a ways away from that. This 10-day ceasefire period that was established on Friday, it's meant to create room for direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon to reach that final peace deal. But at root, and what they'll have to decide at the negotiating table, are two really intractable issues, which is the issues of Hezbollah's arms and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon.
So just explain that a little bit more, because Hezbollah is a very well-armed military force within the country. They are a proxy of Iran, but they're also a political force. So how would that work in terms of disarming them, and who would have authority over that?
Yeah, so obviously the group is not going to give up its arms on its own, and its officials have said that in statements last night. And disarming Hezbollah is very, in the last ceasefire, which ended the last round of fighting in November 2024, the group was also supposed to be disarmed. 2006, it was also supposed to be disarmed, but it hasn't happened, and that's because Hezbollah is a major political force in Lebanon. It's not just an armed group; it enjoys a wide swath of support from a lot of the Lebanese population. And the argument for keeping Hezbollah's arms from the group is that they need to protect the country. They're the only country that can protect. They're the only group in the country that can protect Lebanon from Israeli aggression. Among the group's supporters, that argument seems more cogent than ever since the latest round of fighting started. Among its opponents in the country, they view the group as having dragged the country into war that they didn't need to be a part of. So it's going to be a big challenge enforcing this sort of disarmament, particularly because Hezbollah is not a party to these direct negotiations between the Lebanese government and Israel.
Yeah, and of course Lebanon does have its own army, doesn't it? Separate to Hezbollah, of course. What do you think the mood is amongst the Lebanese people after yet another round of intense military conflict with Israel that Hezbollah started, of course, when they fired missiles into Israel at the start of the US-Israel war with Iran? Do you feel like support is growing or dwindling for Hezbollah?
It's a complicated question to ask because it depends on who you ask in Lebanon. It's a very diverse country with a lot of different opinions. If we simplify it, you could say there's two groups on this issue: those who are opponents of Hezbollah and those who are supporters of Hezbollah. Among the opponents, there's a lot of anger that they were dragged into this war. They saw this as Iran's war with Israel, not Lebanon's, and they're very angry that all this destruction that happened over the last 44 days had to happen to the country. And they're very eager for these negotiations to take place because, even if they aren't a friend of Israel, they just want peace in the country. Now, among Hezbollah's supporters, the last 44 days of conflict has sort of intensified solidarity with the group. In the first days when Hezbollah entered the conflict by launching those rockets, there was even anger among the group's supporters. That quickly faded as the scale of Israeli bombing expanded and civilians started to be killed too. And now more than ever, they view the Lebanese army as unable to defend the country, either unable or unwilling, from Israeli aggression. And so they've rallied around the flag when it comes to Hezbollah.
And what's the Sorry, carry on.
No, you have a very split opinion.
And what's the situation on the ground in terms of territory in the areas that Israel has moved into?
So Israel remains in their positions in South Lebanon, in the central sector, in the western sector, and the eastern sector of South Lebanon. And they said they'd stay there. And they've bombed residents who've gotten too close to the villages. At the same time, they've said that they'll continue detonating houses in those areas they control. They control around 55 villages in southern Lebanon. And they said they won't leave until the safety of the northern residents of Israel is guaranteed. Now, the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, says he's going to try to secure the withdrawal of Israel from Lebanese land. But we'll see what happens. I mean, what's clear is that, the reason for the ceasefire in Lebanon is because both Iran and the U.S. forced Israel and Hezbollah to the negotiating table. The statements from Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz make it clear that they wanted to keep going in Lebanon and that they don't feel like the mission is done. But they have little choice but to negotiate when Trump asks them to.
Okay, William, thank you.